For 4 long years, I was nothing more than a shadow in my own home, ignored, exploited, and silenced by the very family I had devoted my life to. I cooked their meals, watched their children, paid their bills, and yet, when I needed them most, they turned their backs and told me I no longer belonged. This is the story of how a mother's love was met with betrayal, how a house became a prison, and how one woman found the strength to reclaim her dignity from those who should have cherished her. If you want to hear how one woman rose from heartbreak to reclaim her freedom, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss a moment of this journey. Eleanor Harper's home was once filled with the warmth of laughter, the comforting hum of daily life, and the steady rhythm of shared years. At 68, she lived in the very house she and her husband Robert had built together over 3 decades ago, a modest but cherished refuge in the quiet town where they had raised their family. But now, every corner of the house seemed to echo a deafening silence, each room a reminder of what had been lost. Robert's death was sudden and brutal. After 45 years of marriage, after a lifetime woven with memories, love, and shared struggles, his heart stopped without warning, right there in their dining room, over a dinner he'd been savoring. Eleanor could still see the moment as if it had frozen in time, his hand trembling as he reached for his favorite apple pie, the sudden cough that stole his breath away, and then the heartbreaking fall, his face landing in the remnants of a meal meant to be shared. That night shattered Eleanor's world. The ground beneath her feet felt as if it had cracked open, swallowing every certainty she once held. The house, once her sanctuary, became a cavernous reminder of absence. The walls seemed to close in, the familiar rooms twisting into strange, hollow spaces where the only sound was the relentless beating of her own heart. In the days that followed, her children came, one by one in pairs, their faces etched with grief and duty. Terence, her eldest, arrived with his wife, Nola, stoic and distant. Wanda, her daughter, followed with Pierce, her husband, and their children trailing behind, their voices loud but their eyes often elsewhere. They said the words they were expected to say, offered embraces that felt obligatory, promised support that seemed sincere but fleeting. And then, just as quickly as they came, they left. The house emptied again, leaving Eleanor alone with her thoughts and memories. The silence was suffocating, a weight pressing down on her chest. In a desperate attempt to break the quiet, she wandered from room to room, speaking softly to herself, clinging to any sound that could fill the void. The house no longer felt like home. It was a mausoleum of memories, a space haunted by absence. Her footsteps echoed in the hallways, a lonely cadence that marked the passing of time. She paused often, resting her hand against the faded wallpaper, tracing the edges of a family photograph, or lingering by the window where sunlight no longer brought warmth. Sometimes she spoke aloud, sharing stories with shadows, the stories Robert would have told, the moments they had dreamed of. But the shadows answered only with silence. The ache of solitude was a new companion, relentless and unyielding. Eleanor felt herself slipping between the cracks of the life she once knew and the uncertain space that now defined her existence. The house, the memories, the very walls seemed to hold their breath, waiting for something to change. But for now, Eleanor was left to navigate the stillness, a fading figure in the home she had built and loved. The first time Terence, Eleanor's eldest son, knocked on her door with his family in tow, Eleanor welcomed them with hope and love. "Just for a little while," he had said, "until we get back on our feet." Those words were like a lifeline thrown into her sea of loneliness. She imagined the house once again bustling with the sounds of family, children's laughter, the clinking of plates, the warmth of shared meals. It was supposed to be temporary, but time has a way of swallowing promises whole. With Terence came his wife, Nola, quiet but present, and their 2 children, busy, demanding, oblivious to the delicate balance Eleanor hoped to preserve. Their arrival shifted the energy of the house. Rooms once calm now echoed with footsteps and chatter, voices overlapping in an endless stream of noise. Eleanor tried to adjust, to share her home without complaint, but the lines between hers and theirs began to blur. Not long after, Wanda reached out with desperation. Their landlord was raising the rent again. Could she come for a few months? Eleanor, still tethered to the belief that family is everything, agreed without hesitation. She reminded herself it was only for a while. But a few months grew into years. 4 years later, Eleanor's home was no longer her sanctuary. It was a crowded, noisy prison where her needs came last and her voice faded into the background. The house's rhythm belonged to others now. Mornings started with the clatter of cereal boxes and shouting children demanding breakfast on their own terms, never mind the cluttered kitchen sink filled with dirty dishes from last night. Eleanor rose early, hoping to carve out small pockets of peace, only to find her plans undone by the relentless tide of others' needs. The grandchildren, unchecked and boisterous, treated the home like a playground. Willow, the 10-year-old, had no qualms about barging into Eleanor's room unannounced. Doors were mere suggestions. Privacy, an obsolete concept. Eleanor's treasured belongings, a scarf here, a book there, disappeared only to be found tossed aside in corners or strewn across the living room floor. When Eleanor gently asked for respect, she was met with eye rolls or shrugs. Lawrence, the youngest at 8, had made Eleanor's bedroom his favorite hide-and-seek spot. His laughter echoed behind the closed door while Eleanor stood outside, waiting for a moment of calm that never came. "Grandma's room is the best place to play," he'd say with childish innocence, unaware of the boundaries being shattered. Her protests were quiet, almost apologetic, as though her requests were burdensome rather than rightful. She would ask, "Please knock," or "Could you not take my things?" only to be met with sighs or dismissive glances, as if Eleanor's feelings were inconvenient obstacles to their amusement. Her children mirrored the indifference of their offspring. Terence, once a son eager to reassure her, became a man absorbed in his own world. He often appeared in the kitchen, already dressed for work, muttering quick thanks as he grabbed toast, but never staying long enough to share a moment or ask how Eleanor was. His phone was a constant companion, more present than any conversation. Nola, perpetually busy, barely acknowledged Eleanor's presence beyond curt requests. "Could you pick up the kids today? I have overtime." Her tone held no warmth, no gratitude, only expectation. Wanda was sharper still, her words clipped, commands disguised as casual remarks. "Mom, I need you to cook dinner again. Pierce has late meetings." Her eyes barely met Eleanor's as she spoke, the assumption clear. Eleanor existed to serve, not to be seen. Pierce, the son-in-law, slouched into the house with the weariness of a man who felt entitled to rest, never once lifting a finger to ease the mounting household burden. His voice was sharp when Eleanor asked for quiet or a little help. "I've worked all day," he'd say, retreating to the television's glow, as if Eleanor's fatigue was invisible. The children themselves followed these unspoken rules. Eleanor was the invisible servant, a fixture of the house rather than a person with her own needs and desires. When Lawrence spilled juice on the floor, he shrugged and said, "Grandma will clean it up." No apologies, no concern, just the resigned certainty that Eleanor would fix what was broken, as she always did. Greer, the eldest granddaughter, was vocal in her complaints. The clothes in her closet were all wrong, the food never good enough. Eleanor learned to nod and smile through the criticism, burying the sting beneath layers of tired acceptance. Days bled into one another, with Eleanor moving silently through the house, tending to chores without acknowledgement. She cooked meals no one thanked her for, washed dishes no one noticed, clean messes left by careless hands. Her own needs, her own moments of rest, were sacrificed in silence. The home, once a place of pride and peace, had become a battleground for control, a place where Eleanor's identity and dignity were chipped away piece by piece. In the quietest moments, Eleanor felt the crushing weight of invisibility. She was there but not seen. She was doing but never acknowledged. The love she had poured into raising her children seemed forgotten, replaced by a casual disregard that tore at her soul. And yet, she held on to the hope that this was temporary, that her family would find their footing and return the respect she deserved. But each passing day without change deepened the fracture. Eleanor's spirit began to fray, her resilience tested as the house grew louder and colder, and her place within it grew smaller and more uncertain. Each morning, Eleanor woke to the relentless weight of invisible labor, tasks that demanded her presence, her energy, and yet carried no acknowledgement, no thanks. The alarm clock's shrill ring was often drowned by the chorus of demands erupting around the house, pulling her from sleep into a cycle she never chose but could not escape. In the kitchen, Eleanor became a ghostly conductor of the morning chaos, orchestrating a symphony of unfinished plates and unspoken complaints. She scrambled eggs and toasted bread, carefully making coffee as her grandchildren argued over who wanted what cereal or why the milk wasn't cold enough. The smell of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the clatter of cereal boxes being rifled through in frustration. She moved with quiet grace, a practiced dance of efficiency born from years of sacrifice, yet her every gesture went unnoticed. Greer, the oldest granddaughter, dismissed Eleanor's offerings with a sniff. "Why is there never anything good to eat here?" Eleanor simply smiled, swallowing the sting behind the smile. While the children demanded and the adults barked orders, Eleanor's heart grew heavier with each passing day. She juggled the endless demands of breakfast preparation, school lunches packed with care, and schedules to manage, all for a family that seemed to take her presence for granted as a permanent fixture. And then came the money. The bills, the electric, water, and gas notices, piled up like silent threats on the kitchen counter. Eleanor's eyes scanned each one, the amounts growing higher, deadlines inching closer. She remembered handing Terrence the money months ago, trusting he would pay them on time. But those payments had either been delayed or ignored, buried under his own pressing expenses. A stark letter arrived, warning that without payment, the utilities would be cut off within days. The thought of a dark, cold home, her sanctuary stripped bare, sent a tremor through Eleanor's spirit. She tried to confront Terrence about the unpaid bills, seeking explanations or at least assurances. His excuses were hollow. "I forgot. I had other urgent things." Or worse, silence. Sometimes she caught him using the money she gave him for the bills on other things. Dinners out, new gadgets, or paying off personal debts, leaving her to pick up the pieces. Eleanor felt the walls closing in not just physically but emotionally. The home she had once built with love and pride had become a source of anxiety and heartbreak. Yet, the psychological torment went beyond unpaid bills and chores. It was the quiet, accumulating erosion of her dignity. In moments when she tried to express fatigue or ask for a moment's kindness, she was met with impatience or indifference. Her children, wrapped up in their own lives, rarely paused to see her as a person rather than a caretaker or an ATM. This contradiction tore at Eleanor's heart. The same mother who had devoted decades to nurturing and supporting her family was now regarded as a servant, a shadow in her own home, a name called only when a task needed doing. The internal battle was exhausting. Her maternal instincts screamed to forgive, to serve, to keep the family together. But each day brought fresh wounds, each neglect a new fracture in her spirit. She wrestled with guilt, the nagging question of whether she was being selfish for wanting respect and space, or if her desire to be seen as more than a housekeeper was unreasonable. Some mornings, the tears came unbidden, flowing silently in the solitude of her bedroom. She would lie awake, haunted by memories of Robert, her husband who had always insisted she deserved honor and kindness, and wonder how she had come to be so invisible. This growing despair was a shadow that followed her from room to room, from chore to chore, threatening to consume the woman who once was the beating heart of her family. Yet, beneath that shadow flickered a small, stubborn spark of resolve, a whispered promise that she would not remain invisible forever. Eleanor spent the afternoon in a rare flurry of purpose. She wiped the counters until they gleamed faintly beneath the soft glow of the kitchen lights, and carefully set the dining table with the fine china she and Robert had saved for special occasions, delicate plates edged with gold, crystal glasses that caught the candlelight in a gentle dance. She lit 2 tall candles, their flames flickering softly, casting a warm glow that softened the sharp edges of the day. Her hands trembled slightly as she prepared the meal, a roast, vegetables glazed with butter, and for dessert, Robert's favorite apple pie. Each dish was a thread woven into the fabric of her past, memories of shared dinners, laughter, and promises whispered across the table. This dinner was meant to be different. Eleanor hoped to create a moment of connection, a brief respite from the growing distance between her and her family. But as the family gathered, Terrence and Nola, Wanda and Pierce, and the children, the air was thick with tension. The polite smiles were brittle, barely masking the undercurrent of impatience and resentment. Voices were clipped, eyes rarely met hers except in passing. The meal began with forced conversation, empty exchanges about work, school, and trivial news. Eleanor attempted to inject warmth, asking questions, recalling old stories, but her efforts were met with one-word answers or polite nods. It was as if she was a ghost, a fixture of the room rather than a participant in the gathering. Greer pushed her plate away with a grimace. "You put too much salt in this," she complained bluntly. Eleanor swallowed the lump rising in her throat, quietly taking the plate from her granddaughter, whispering an apology she did not fully believe. Pierce, already halfway through his meal, added with a sneer, "This bread's stale. When was the last time you went shopping?" Eleanor's voice faltered as she replied softly, "Yesterday, I bought fresh bread." He waved her off, uninterested. The disrespect was sharp, like a series of unseen knives cutting deeper than any argument could. Yet no one addressed the wounds they inflicted. It was a silent war of omission and disdain, a battlefield strewn with broken affection and unspoken accusations. Then came the unthinkable, the suggestion that Eleanor move into a retirement home. Wanda's voice was almost clinical as she laid out the plan. "Mom, it's for your own good. The house is too much for you to manage alone." Terrence nodded. "There are excellent facilities, medical staff, activities. You'd be safer, more comfortable." Nola chimed in. "My aunt moved into one last year. It's not what you think. It's a community." Eleanor's heart shattered with each word. The home she had built, the memories engraved in every corner, the life she had fought to sustain, all suddenly seemed disposable. They wanted her gone, relegated to a place she had always feared, a stranger in a sterile room surrounded by unfamiliar faces. In that moment, the floodgates opened within her. Her mind raced back to Robert, the man who had held her hand through decades of struggle and joy, who had taught her the meaning of respect and strength. He had always said, "Eleanor, never let anyone trample on your worth. You deserve to be seen, to be honored." Tears blurred her vision as a fierce resolve began to kindle inside, a fire ignited by the pain of betrayal and the refusal to be erased. The love she held for her children and grandchildren wrestled violently with the indignity thrust upon her. Could she forgive the ones who turned their backs? Could she remain silent in the face of such rejection? That night, Eleanor lay awake beneath the weight of conflicting emotions. The flickering candlelight had long since died, but within her, a new light burned, fragile but fierce, a promise to reclaim her life, her home, and her dignity. For the first time in years, Eleanor woke without the familiar summons of others. No shouts echoing down the hall, no urgent footsteps pounding on her door. The silence was not the oppressive quiet she had grown accustomed to, but a gentle, almost sacred stillness that wrapped around her like a soft shawl. She lay there for a moment, eyes open to the muted light filtering through the curtains, breathing in the rare peace that came with being alone in her own home. There was no rush, no demands, no weight of invisible chores pressing her into motion. For once, Eleanor was not a caretaker, not a servant. She was simply Eleanor, a woman reclaiming a fragment of herself. Rising slowly, she moved through the house with a tentative hope. In the kitchen, she made a simple breakfast, savoring each bite as if rediscovering a long-forgotten pleasure. The taste was tinged with bittersweet memory, but it was hers to enjoy, uninterrupted. As the morning sun climbed higher, Eleanor prepared to meet Letty, her steadfast friend and confidant, the one person whose presence had never faltered during the darkest chapters of her life. Letty greeted her with a knowing smile and an embrace that spoke volumes without words. They settled into the cozy corner of their favorite cafe, the comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingling with the soft hum of quiet conversation. Eleanor poured out her heart, the pent-up sorrow and frustration spilling forth like a dam breaking. Letty listened intently, her eyes reflecting both empathy and fierce resolve. When Eleanor paused, Letty spoke plainly, cutting through the haze of denial and pain. "You've given them too much," she said gently but firmly. "Your children have grown used to taking without giving back. It's not love, it's entitlement. And if you don't set boundaries, they will keep walking all over you." Eleanor felt the weight of those words settle deep within her. She had always been the forgiving mother, the selfless caregiver, believing love meant sacrifice without question. But Letty's truth pierced through. There was no love in exploitation, no respect in taking for granted. For the first time, Eleanor dared to imagine a different path. She pictured a home where she was no longer invisible, where her needs mattered, where her dignity was honored. The thought was both terrifying and liberating. Letty's voice softened. It's okay to say no. It's okay to put yourself first. You don't owe anyone endless service, especially not those who disregard you. Eleanor nodded, tears shimmering in her eyes. The realization that she could reclaim her life, that she must, ignited a quiet fire within. It was the first spark of rebellion born from years of silent suffering. That morning marked the beginning of Eleanor's transformation, the day she chose herself, stepped out of the shadows, and prepared to confront the painful truths that awaited in her own home. The moment Eleanor finally dialed the number for Hadley Drummond, a lawyer with a reputation for empathy and strength, a tremor ran through her, a mixture of fear, hope, and resolve. It was the first time in years she was taking a step not just for her family, but for herself. Their meeting took place in a modest office, quiet but commanding respect with its polished wood and shelves lined with books of law. Eleanor sat across from Hadley, the weight of her story spilling out in measured words, the years of sacrifice, the gradual erasure of her place in the home she owned, the unspoken tension simmering beneath the surface. Hadley listened attentively, nodding with understanding but never offering false comfort. When Eleanor described the temporary living arrangements that had turned permanent, the unpaid bills, and the creeping sense of invisibility, Hadley's gaze sharpened. "This is your house, Mrs. Harper," Hadley said firmly. "Legally, you hold the title and the rights that come with it. Your children, while adults living with you, are considered tenants under an informal agreement. If they do not honor the terms, if they don't pay rent or respect your home, you have the right to terminate that agreement." The words hung in the air, heavy and clear. Eleanor felt a mixture of relief and dread. The idea of evicting her own children was terrifying. It felt like a betrayal, a breaking of bonds she had spent a lifetime nurturing. Yet, beneath the fear was a spark of something new, possibility. The chance to reclaim her home, her life, and her dignity. With Hadley's guidance, Eleanor began to understand the steps she needed to take. The first was to issue a formal eviction notice, a document that would legally require her children to find alternative housing within a set time frame. The thought was daunting. How would they react? Could she withstand the backlash? Still, Eleanor's determination grew. She meticulously filled out the notice with Hadley's help, each signature a silent vow to herself that she would no longer be invisible. The night before delivering the notice, Eleanor's mind raced with conflicting emotions. Guilt for the pain it might cause, anxiety over fractured family ties, but also a resolute clarity that this was necessary. She wasn't just fighting for a house. She was fighting for respect, for acknowledgement, for the right to live on her own terms. To prepare, she reached out to Letty and a few trusted friends, sharing her plan and enlisting their support. The community that had stood beside her in quieter moments now rallied, a network of strength and encouragement. The day Eleanor handed the eviction notices to her children was one she would never forget. She gathered them in the living room, the same room that had witnessed years of silent suffering and unspoken resentment. With steady hands, she placed a copy of the notice in each of their grasp. For a brief moment, silence swallowed the room. Then came the storm. Shocked gasps, raised voices, accusations of betrayal and cruelty. Tears were shed, anger flared, and blame was hurled like daggers. But Eleanor stood firm, her heart pounding but her resolve unshaken. "I have lived in this house my entire life," she said, voice steady but filled with the years of pain beneath. "And I deserve to live here with respect and peace. This is my home. I am not asking you to leave out of spite, but because I must live for myself now." The children's confusion and fury swirled around her, but Eleanor no longer wavered. The fight had begun, a fight not just for property, but for the dignity and honor she had been denied for too long. The day Eleanor met Brooke Holloway, the local real estate agent, was the day she confronted a truth she had long avoided. that to reclaim her life, she might have to let go of the home she had cherished for decades. Brooke's office was unpretentious but professional, the walls adorned with framed sold signs and property listings. Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she sat across from Brooke, laying out her plan in quiet, deliberate words. "I'm not just selling a house," Eleanor said, her voice steady yet heavy with unspoken memories. "I'm reclaiming my future." Brooke listened carefully, her eyes reflecting both sympathy and resolve. They discussed the logistics, valuation, marketing, and the delicate balance of timing. Eleanor insisted on a discreet but firm approach. She wanted to send a clear message to her children, to show that this was not a whim but a decisive step. They devised a strategy to stage the house, preparing a compelling presentation that would simulate an eager buyer's interest, an invisible pressure on Eleanor's family, an unmistakable sign that change was imminent and irreversible. Back home, Eleanor felt the weight of anticipation settle over her. The house, once a sanctuary, now seemed to hold its breath, as if sensing the storm on the horizon. The day of the final family meeting arrived, charged with tension and raw emotion. Eleanor stood at the head of the table, the same table where years of silence and pain had festered. The room was filled with the faces of those she had loved and who had, in many ways, betrayed her. With calm resolve, Eleanor shared the news. The house was for sale. The decision was hers alone, and she intended to move on, to travel, to experience the life she had deferred for so long. Shock rippled through the family. Terrence's face tightened with disbelief. Wanda's eyes glistened with unshed tears, and Pierce shifted uncomfortably, the gravity of loss sinking in. The children sensed the irrevocable change, the closing of a chapter they had taken for granted. Arguments flared, pleas to reconsider, accusations of selfishness, fears of displacement. Yet beneath the noise, a slow acceptance began to dawn. They understood, perhaps for the first time, the depth of Eleanor's pain and the necessity of her choice. Eleanor's heart was a tumult of conflicting emotions. Letting go of the house, the physical embodiment of decades of memories and love, was agonizing. It was a surrender of the past she had fought to preserve. But intertwined with the sorrow was a profound liberation. Free from the weight of invisible servitude and disrespect, she felt a stirring of hope, an opening toward a future shaped by her own desires and dignity. The sale was not merely a transaction. It was a declaration. Eleanor was reclaiming her story, stepping away from the shadows cast by betrayal to stand firmly in the light of self-worth. As the meeting drew to a close and the family dispersed, Eleanor allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. The journey ahead was uncertain, filled with unknowns, but for the first time in years, she faced it with open eyes and an unyielding spirit. As the sun rose on a new chapter of her life, Eleanor sat quietly in her favorite armchair, the fabric worn soft beneath her hands. The house around her, once a place of silent suffering, now felt like the birthplace of her rebirth. For the first time in decades, Eleanor dared to dream beyond survival, to envision days fill. She shared her plans openly with Letty, Hadley, and Brooke, her unwavering pillars of support. Travel through the cobblestone streets of Europe, the sun-dappled plazas of Italy, the vibrant markets of Spain, long walks along unfamiliar shores, books read in quiet cafes, evenings filled with music, laughter, and in their warm encouragement, Eleanor found solace and strength. The burden of invisible servitude lifted, replaced by the exhilarating sense of reclaiming her own narrative. She realized that true respect, true love, was never about blind sacrifice or enduring pain in silence. It was about setting boundaries, honoring oneself, and living authentically. Her eyes, once clouded by years of hurt and neglect, now sparkled with quiet determination and peace. Eleanor understood that this was not just a physical freedom, but a spiritual liberation, a healing of wounds that ran deeper than bricks and mortar. As she gazed out the window, the world beyond seemed vast and inviting, full of possibilities. The journey ahead was hers alone to shape, and for the first time, she felt ready. If you found inspiration in Eleanor's story, a testament to resilience, dignity, and the courage to reclaim one's life, please follow for the next chapters of her journey. Share this story to light a path for those who may be walking a similar road in silence. Together, we can remind each other that no one deserves to be invisible in their own home. Thank you so much for staying with me through Eleanor's story. Your time and attention mean the world. If her journey touched your heart, please consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell so you won't miss the next chapters. Remember to take care of yourself, your well-being matters. See you soon.